and welcome back to another exciting episode of Optometry Unleashed. Today, we have a truly exceptional guest on the show. Simon Whitfield is a four-time Olympian and Canada's most decorated triathlete, winning gold in the first ever Olympic triathlon at the Sydney 2000 Games and silver in Beijing in 2008. Known for his resilience, determination, and remarkable athleticism, he's a true legend and world-class champion. But Simon's story doesn't end at the finish line. After retiring from professional sports, Simon brought his passion and drive to the business world. As co-founder of Relentless Pursuit Partners, Simon invests in innovative technologies focused on optimizing lifelong health and access to care. Looking through the lens of a champion, we'll tease out the winning skills, habits, and mentality we can draw from and apply in the world of optometry. I couldn't be more thrilled that he's here today. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Simon Whitfield.
Hey, Trevor, thanks for having me. I like how you used looking through the lens of. That was well done.
Yeah. We just got to throw a little optometry pun humor in.
Oh, that was good. That was 2020. So there you go.
And so great to have you here. And how's your summer been?
Yeah, good. We've got lots of time at home, lots of time out on the water, just exploring. We live in a pretty spectacular place, don't we? This Vancouver Island. I don't know, the abundance of adventure that goes on here. So I'm hoping you've had the same.
Yeah, totally. It is beautiful. It's beautiful. And, you feel the summer day slipping away and you just don't want to let it go. That's my feeling. Sometimes you have to be present and enjoy each day
Yeah.
because you got to savor it.
Yeah, I find that with August. I have this tremendous relationship with August where I kind of same thing. I'm like, oh man, it's coming. The back to life, back to reality is coming. But yeah, thoroughly enjoying it. So
Yeah. And are you stand-up paddleboarding quite a bit? Is that what you're doing out on the water?
I'm really just in and around the ocean. I'm trying to either get out swimming, a little bit of fishing, maybe we're stand up paddling. I try and avoid kayaking just because it's uncomfortable, but yeah, just in and around. It might even be just a trail by the ocean. I just noticed that there's nothing saltwater can't fix, so that's where I always head and try and do daily.
And they say that's great for your health, right? Saltwater bathing, right? Cold water bathing.
Yeah, it turns out saltwater is good for you. It's one of those things like I'd like to see the studies. I'm like, yeah, I mean, true also, but that just makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
turns out saltwater is good for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does turn out that way. Yeah.
Like so many things, we like to complicate things, and I get it, and I think we find meaning in trying to make things complicated and then unwind them. But that's one of those things where, yeah, you just kind of realize, like, wait a minute, it turns out if I get a bunch of salt water up my nose, I don't get sick as much. Kind of common
Yeah,
sense. Yeah,
true. And then just,
yeah,
doing things that you enjoy, I think are good for you, right? To some degree, if
yeah.
you're having fun and finding joy in what you're doing, that's good for you.
It turns out you don't have to go Goggins everything, which is a bit of a you have to kind of know the cultural meme there, but you don't
Yeah.
have to go like get bare feet and go walk on glass just to do it. You can like you can
Yeah.
life can be hard but you don't need to go manufacture it as much as you can. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it's a
That's
balance,
right.
isn't it? There you go. Not too many Goggins things.
And, recently, did you watch the Olympics?
Yeah, I did as much as I could. It's again, it's summertime, you're trying to be outside, so the timing of it was pretty good to be able to watch it in the morning, watch it at night. Certainly saw some great events. I always latch on to one or two moments that really define it for me. Those are the things that I really, if you ask me about a certain Olympics, it's a certain moment, and it's not necessarily to do with winning. It's like something that happened that's just super obscure, or a human condition thing where you're like, oh right, of course that happens. Of course, someone goes and warms up is a medal favorite in a track and field event, goes out to warm up and trips over a barrier and breaks their ankle, and like that's the end of their Olympics. And that happened to a German woman in the heptathlon, and you're just like, oh yeah, right. I mean, there's the human experience right there, isn't it? So those moments, and then obviously, the big hearing the anthem moments. But yeah, it was a great Olympics. Did you watch? Did you get into it?
I watched some of it. I watched some of the highlights. It was great. My phone would tag me when the 4x100 meters was about to, relay was on. So that was cool. So I got to see some of those cool moments. And it actually reminds me of you. You were one of my Olympic highlights when you won the gold medal And just the joy, I think the joy in your face and eyes, and just you were cheering like this, and I could feel it. I
Yeah.
felt like the whole country was cheering at the same time you crossed the line. So, I mean, you just have to. You kind of. I guess the timing was that we could watch that, or I could watch that particular day. I don't know what the time of day was back here, but interesting that I can that you can really it stays with you some of those Ben Johnson when he crossed the finish line, those kind of events,
Yeah.
kind of stay with you in time.
Yeah, you have those. I have those. I remember where I was when Ben Johnson won. I was on Collingwood Street. I was with Andre and Jeff. We ran out on the street and sprinted down the street. I remember we were not young enough to still have the joy of it all. So yeah, there's those defining moments, and then yeah, in terms of my own Olympic career, it does sound often feels like it's this thing that happened to somebody that I know a lot. I know the most wrong stories about. It's like it's kind of like it's like three lives ago. So it's fun to go back and reflect on it at times. It's fun to see. It's also interesting to see how the memories change as we sculpt them to suit how we see the world now. And it would be really interesting to be able to see over time, how did my story change over time? And how did my description of the feelings change over time? Now that I have the like quote unquote wisdom I have now. Question mark.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such a great thought, experiment is to think about what how have you felt with your memories over time, and obviously just like anything, even our memories of what is happening evolve, our thought processes evolve. So that's a really fascinating viewpoint.
Yeah, I think in particular with something like an event, in this case, this event that you're recalling and that I'm recalling from your recall, and that I've been asked about so many times, every time I change the story, right, it pivots. And it never goes back to the original. Maybe it loops its way back, I don't know, but over time it changes. And I've had it, it's been interesting to think back of kind of some of the different versions I've had of it. And then starting to wonder, like, was Dave Lovelace really up the tree clapping, or did I add that to the story later? Because Dave doesn't remember.
Yeah.
So years later, like a friend who came from home, who I'm like, oh, and I saw you in the tree. And years later, he's like, I thought I was down at the finish. And I'm like, oh, then who was in the tree? And it's like I've slowly sculpted this part of the story into my story. And that's true for everything. I think once you realize that, there's like a moment of reckoning where you're like, oh, wait a minute, my memories aren't as secure as I thought they were. And then I found a bit of freedom from that. Kind of like, oh, I don't have to hold on to it so tightly. I really try, and I joke, but I say the same thing every time. It's three lives ago, and it's a story about someone I know a lot. I know the most wrong stories about,
Yeah.
and it's a way to hold it lightly. So
I mean, it's true. It's true. And it's just even though it was a big moment for a lot of people, including, the whole country, it's just a moment of it's a snapshot of your life. It's
mm,
not defining your life truly. I mean, even though it was a big moment and a momentous moment and a great accomplishment, it's really, really fascinating that way. Yeah, I think it's interesting, to could you be really present in the moment that you're in, and that is the most unique time. That's when you will experience what you're experiencing in real time, and everything else is not. It's a facsimile of reality. It is how you remember it, how you carve it, how you want it to be potentially. As the time from the present reality changes to a future tense. So I find that that's really fascinating to even ponder.
yeah, there's a Sherman Alexie. He wrote this book, Tonto and um, the Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven, and he refers to watches, and he says the time is always now. We don't wear watches because the time is always now. Your
Oh,
skeleton walks one step behind you. The skeleton of the future walks one step in front of you. But the time is actually always now. I really like read that and I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's so correct. And also, that's the human experience. I have a story about how I got here, and I have a like anxiety and I don't know trepidation about what's coming up, and yet the real gift is to whatever that cliche expression, hallmark expression is, like the present is a gift, you know? So it's like, and that's why we do sport. I think we talked a lot about this when we're talking about sport. Like when we talk about tennis, how you just love when the ball slows right down, you can see the logo coming and you know the spin and you step into it and all of it is intuitive and you play the shot. But if you start to think like, oh, geez, I'm down 40 and I'm like, if I lose this point, I lose the match, then you're not in frame with the moment. You're not in synchronized with it and you misplay it. And so it's such a beautiful experience when you can look back and you're having to like picture it because you weren't ingraining it in memory. You were just doing it. And I think
Totally.
we all strive for that.
I think society as a whole kind of misses being present, right? And if we weave that back into optometry, there's a lot of things going on. There's an emergency fit in, there's that. You were trying to be present with the patient we're at and experience that really, sort of, if I could call it, intimate moment with your patient where you're just, you know, figuring out what's going on and explaining, educating them, examining their eyes, and just freeing your mind of the thoughts of what's happened for the last patient or what's going on at home or anything else in the office, staff issues. You're just focusing on your patient. So it's a real gift to be able to center yourself in the present and just really focus and be there. And I think that's a challenge for, almost all of us, regardless of your profession, but definitely in optometry, I find that I had to really practice that. And sometimes even Instagram, taking pictures, what are you doing? You're missing the moment to some degree to reframe the future. And I find that fascinating. I used to not take pictures at all. I'd be like, I don't want pictures. Now I find myself sharing everything, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, that's such a hard thing. I mean, it's such a big topic. I notice if I participate in social media, I begin to participate in manufactured spontaneity. Like wouldn't this moment be just lovely if you just stood a little bit over there so the light got you just right so the views would be good? And then you're constantly kind of curating moments. And then later you think you can only really recall what happened based on this like storyline that you wrote because you thought it would play well in the future and convey an image or a sense of who you are that suited whatever whatever you are at in the present. I'm not again though, it's not better or worse, it's just different. It's like trying to have a healthy relationship with that and not impart too much meaning onto that to say, oh, it's all these things and therefore I can't do it. It's just trying to be content in that notion that like A, none of us really know what we're doing, and B, like we're all doing our best. So yeah, I have same struggles. I sometimes I take pictures, sometimes I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
right. There's no right or wrong way. I don't think. I mean, I think it's interesting to ponder. Are we missing out? Or not? But to at least enjoy that moment, regardless of that bit of imperfection. That little bit of, hey, it's funny because my daughter would say, Naya, who's in optometry school, hey, my friends really like your sort of fuzzy photos and they're not really edited properly. That's the new thing. It's just being real in the
Mhm.
moment. And that's a bit more of a trend on social media. So I was on trend there because I couldn't care to really take the time
Yeah.
to edit it.
Because your finger was over the lens.
Yeah.
That's so good.
And I posted it anyway.
You're just a dad who is a pure dad moment. That's so good. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to, I mean, again, I don't know how do you like lose the moment because you're thinking about too much about the implications of the moment and how you're perceived in that moment. Yada
Yeah.
yada yada. I
So
will say
so
I do love the art of it. I have good friends who are say photographers or content creators or whatever it is, they use their imagination a lot and they're interesting people and they are very observant. I'm thinking specifically of Jared Koreski. He's a wildlife photographer from Tofino and he's just one of the greatest, one most wonderful humans you'll ever meet. And because he sees so much of the world through this lens, this literal lens, he
hmm
has such an interesting perspective on the world because he's often locked in that like in the aperture and he's like watching just the moment. So he's actually a very present person and he's a very kind person and he's a very observant person. And he's seen an incredible combination of people, which is a concept that I'm kind of been latching onto recently is you notice it with people who host, particularly say if you were to go to any kind of hospitality circumstance, you'll meet people who are so good with people because they've seen so many combinations of people, both staff, the team that's with them hosting at say you're at a resort and the host is out front. Think of how many combinations of both team and guest they've seen. They've hosted a family that's getting along. They've hosted two families that aren't. They've hosted three strangers who suddenly get along and then suddenly don't. Whatever you could think of over the period, you think over multiple times that they've done this, iterate, they become incredible people, 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 and they can pronounce things properly too. And they have a skill that's the greatest skill, right? Human relations. Like, what other skill do you need? And in
Yeah.
geometry, you better have it. You're poking around with my eyes.
Yeah, and I better be able to relate to you, so you trust me to poke around, around your eyes. And I think it's so true. I mean, you end up morphing yourself into the right, in quotes, person for the time and for the patient, what they need at the time. So that's a real skill set, and yeah, so interesting. That was wabi sabi was the Japanese word for the acceptance of transience and imperfection. So wabi sabi is very. I
Well,
like that,
sorry.
where you can accept something when it's not perfect, and that's the beauty in it. I want to take a moment to say thank you to Hoya Vision Canada, our sponsor for this episode. Hoya empowers eye care professionals to achieve their business goals through comprehensive training and regular business reviews. Super High Vision Mirio EX4 is the latest innovative anti-reflection coating that has set new industry standards for clarity and durability. Also, their award-winning myopia management lens, MyoSmart, has sold over 4 million lenses worldwide. To learn more, contact your local Hoya territory manager today and elevate your practice. And now, back to our conversation with Simon Whitfield. Well, Simon, I wanted to chat with you a little bit about how you got involved in sports at the beginning.
I don't know if I got involved or just got kicked outside. I think that may have been as much as anything. I grew up in Kingston, Ontario on a one block long street that was Couper on one end and Cooper on the other, the French side, the English side. Squarely on the middle. I lived right on just on the other side, on the English side, and on Queen's University campus. And yeah, just a love of, I don't know, I loved exploring. I loved games. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. So eventually your parents kick you outside because you spent too much time fighting dragons. And it's, and you find sport. I found the sport of triathlon. It was an excuse to do fun things with my friends. And eventually it turned into a passion and then an avocation. And then there was, goals and all that stuff. But at the beginning, it was just, I don't know. I wonder if we could swim from here to there and then bike from there to there and then run down the end of the lane, and maybe mom will make us an extra burger. It was kind of the original premise. So it was a fun way to find sport. It was a real blessed childhood. Kingston's a great place to grow up. Queen's University, the institution the institution that is the original capital of Canada, the six prisons, the military college. I grew up within the institution. My dad worked for DuPont. He was a senior research scientist at DuPont. My mom was in the gymnastics world. And so I grew up within the institution of sport, within the institution of university, within the institution of a government town. And so I think I'm somewhat deinstitutionalizing myself over time, but that's a longer story. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that Gordon Downey Pier in Kingston is a great little spot. A lot of the university students hang out there. Do you ever go run there and then jump off and swim?
That's where I grew up. That's where I learned how to swim. I grew up in the same neighborhood as the Hip. our album artwork for Fully Completely is on the back of a garage that faces into Andre Bernier, his place, so or Mode's place. So I was very familiar with that, and it gave me, it's maybe it's cliche, but it gives you that like, oh, I'm from a small town, but I can go and make it. I can take my art elsewhere too. So they certainly set the bar. We've had some great Kingstonians, and the tragedy hit would have to be first and foremost.
It's Canadiana, just like you, Simon.
It is very much, yeah. There you go.
Tragedy Hip and Simon Whitfield, pillars of Canadiana. I want to talk to you about triathlon specifically. Those are kind of three different distinct sports wrapped into one, discipline, one race called, triathlons. I wondered how did you manage those three different sports, and I want to pick your brain a little bit on that.
I mean, I think I've come to see it as we were one of the people that you'd send to get the medicine. So while you were fixing people's eyes, you were in there, working in the health wellness and sight field. Then you said, hey, we need this tincture from three valleys over. There's a lake, there's a mountain, and there's a valley. You got to get across and then get it back to us. You'd be like, I don't know, send that guy. And so actually you'd send me just to get eaten by the bear so she could get through, but you know what I mean? So yeah, that was the original. I look at endurance athletes as that, as were the people you'd send to go get the medicine. And then yeah, managing three sports was just, I mean, I used to joke it was about not having much attention, but actually I think it's just a love of learning new things. And so swimming's this very fundamental thing, every human should be able to swim or given the gift of swimming, whatever it is. And cycling is the epitome of human ingenuity after maybe the incubator. It's the most efficient method of transportation humans have devised. And then forward articulated motion, we happen to call it running. In the case of triathlon, we refer to as running, but really it's just, I don't know, make your way from here to there. They're really basic skills. In fact, they're probably the three most basic mobility skills. And so I found myself in a sport that required you to learn these various skills and at the Olympic level, try and work towards being world class in all three. And yeah, it was a fun journey. Now I can barely swim across the lake, but back then I could, go back and forth. So there you go.
And what's there? You constantly improving, like to be world class to win a Olympic gold medal. You obviously had to shave seconds off in these various disciplines, and having met you in Thailand and talked to you, and just I realized that you're always focused on just improvement, that constant improvement piece. Can you speak to that in your sport?
Yeah, it's the battle for marginal gains. It's like the focus on marginal gains. You do all the hard work and then you go and find all the little marginal gains you can make so you can compile something that means, that is comprehensive and thorough. There's an element of obsession in there, you know, healthy obsession, if those are two words that can go together. I don't know, but it's that it's that careful that fine line between obsessive and life, paying back being obsessive, and yeah, and within that navigating people, because that obsession doesn't really align with navigating people, does it? Like you have to kind of figure out how am I going to be obsessive about these marginal gains and working towards, how am I going to do all the hard work required, the mundane, the shoveling, how am I going to do the fine brush work? And then also, how am I going to do that within the context of I live in a community of people that need you to show up each day and they need you to find, how is it that you contribute, and how it is that you contribute is you find peace and centered in yourself and then you try and contribute. But to be obsessive kind of walks a pretty fine line with at the edge of hey, why don't you go do that over there? Because you're a bit much right now. So yeah, the journey. We all go through it, don't we? I mean, I got to imagine going through optometry school and coming out and then having to balance all of a sudden life. You've gone through school, but then life comes at you. Now you're running a business and now you're interacting with people who have expectations and have paid money to see you, and you're working in such a vulnerable place that it must be very, very challenging. And in its own way, it's sport performance.
Yeah, there's a lot of the similarities in a way, that sort of constant improvement, continuous evolution, that obsession for me. It's it's customer experience, patient care experience, continuing to improve our business, that incrementalism, that, slowly making a change here, online store, internet forms, a new dry eye therapy, macular degeneration wellness center. We're just slowly incrementally improving. But if you're so driven and you forget the people, make that incremental change possible, and you just are driven without considering the people. As per your point, you're going to lose, you're going to lose your ability to be, relatable and world class. So I think that's really fascinating to not forget that relationship piece as you're sort of driving to be world class.
Yeah, it's that's the that fine line. But then if you watched at the last Olympics, I can't remember his last name. He was from New Zealand. He's got a great first name because one of my closest was Hamish Carter. He won the 2004 Olympics in Athens in triathlon, and so Hamish, whose last name is eluding me, a high jumper from New Zealand, is competing against an American whose name is eluding me right now. And the two of them are at the same height. They are the same height. They're jumping the same height. One of them has a tension to him that is palatable. He's 5 centimeters past his PB, so he's in uncharted territory. But he's gone from having fun to now he's taking it seriously. Hamish just keeps rolling. He's like kind of playing with the crowd a little bit. He's got a big smile on his face. He's clearly listening to music in his head. Who do you think wins? I think a lot of us have been taught through sport, particularly our generation was taught like harder is better. This is not about having fun. It's about putting your nose to the grindstone. I would say that the compromise or the happy median is satisfaction. This is satisfying. It is satisfying to run in the rain. It is satisfying to go out and get muddy and then come home and clean off. It's not necessarily fun. That's a version of fun, I suppose, for certain people, but there's some other things tied up in that, I think, for them. So I like the word satisfaction. I like it's satisfying to work hard. It's meaningful. You can find fulfillment from that. And so I would imagine in optometry it's the same. You've got to figure out you're obsessive, you've been working really hard, you've gone through school, you're building up clinic practice, or maybe you've built a practice and now you're trying to figure out what next. If you always just come back to people, 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 you have like the centering force, and then all the other is peripheral because the people won't let you be out of balance within yourself because you'll see it in the people, right? You'll suddenly notice like, oh, wait a minute, everybody's moving in a different direction. People aren't, their customer experience is not good. Where's that coming from? Is it coincidental that all of them keep coming in with poor customer experiences, or is something I'm bringing to the table, the unbalanced nature of the way in which I'm existing now? Is that what's happening? And if you can like be accountable to that, then there's real power in that. Then you've just got to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah, no, I like what you're saying. Sort of enjoy the grind. To me, the analogy is, practice, or even, climbing a mountain. Well, if you're climbing a mountain just to get to the peak, you've just missed so much opportunity to, enjoy, experience satisfaction along the way as you're climbing, to get to that peak where you can see the beautiful views. I think enjoying that grind, if you will, every day does you bring you a lot of satisfaction. I'm sure you've, mentally prepared yourself for those days where you're running in the rain and biking in not great circumstances, or you're a little bit tired and you're still putting in your workout and exercise regimen. So I think that can really resonate with people who are listening to Optometry Unleashed when they like, yeah, life can get you tired, and then you got to try to find that joy in that, getting to work and with the people that you work with and the patients that you experience, and enjoy it. It's not just about working for the weekend. Hey, let's enjoy the week that we're in, and then it doesn't feel like work so much. It feels like part of an enjoyment and satisfaction. I love that. I love the way you framed that.
It's moving towards avocation, isn't it? Which is a privilege. I mean, the idea that you can choose to move towards your avocation instead of having to just work is such a privilege, and that needs to be noted. Where we live, where we're from, the circumstances in which we find ourselves have led us to a place where we can speak of an avocation versus, that's really neat and all, but I've got to just, there's a bunch of coal to be shoveled and mouths to feed. So you can take your avocation and, so it's like being conscious of there's also times where you've got to go shovel coal. And you could be shoveling. The other thing I keep aware of is like, I may be involved and immersed in avocation at this moment. Something could happen, and next week I could be in a place where I'm like, oh man, it is all just about shoveling coal. Life changes pretty quickly. So, tread water when you can. It's a bit of that comes back to that Goggins thing. Like, you don't need to always go make it extra hard because it will come find you. Sometimes it's something to be said for holding onto the dock and you know, having a Fanta. So
You're describing how I swim. I make sure that
I saw I saw
I
you
can hold
swimming.
on to the side. I need a
I
crutch,
saw,
buddy. It's
yeah,
embarrassing.
you haven't had
Let's
a chance to get me back at the tennis court. I got to show off swimming where we were, but I know in the back of my mind I was like, "Ugh, I shouldn't gloat too much because you can serve and I can't serve, so I'm in trouble right
we'll have to
away
do it.
when we play
It's
tennis.
on.
Yeah,
It's on.
yeah. So you
I
count
won't
me in.
forget that at
Yeah.
all. Hey, I wanted to ask you like sort of a two-pronged question here. I know you're taking up soccer, men's soccer, and that's really exciting because that's a sport. I grew up playing one of the sports. I love sport. I'm never great at it, but soccer was my best sport. And I wanted to touch base on how you warm up, which is different than the other lads warming up on the pitch. Can you just describe that a little bit and just just tell me what
Thank
you're
you, Trevor.
how's that taken by the other fellas that
I
you're warming up a little differently. So explain that to me.
That's amazing. You're following up on a conversation we had, and I love it. That's really funny. Yeah, I mean, there are so many ingrained, what do you call them? They're like memes almost. They're things that we've been passed on, and one of them is like stretching and icing, right? Like, gotta stretch, gotta get ice. We were given those as kids, really, especially our generation, and still to this generation, of like, you're gonna warm up, gotta go stretch, and then if you hurt your knee, go ice it. And when you get involved in high performance sport, you get access to people who are really looking into this stuff. They're obsessed. Whatever you're obsessed about, they're obsessed about. We call them secret squirrels. They got this little nugget of information in their cheek that they know a lot about some other things, but they really know all the stuff about this one little piece of nugget that's in their cheek. And so over time, and thinking high performance sport, you have the privilege of meeting, if you're willing to ask, and not just the word salad of I'm curious, but actually going and asking, because we're all good at saying I'm curious, I'm the curious type, a growth mindset. But like, do you actually go do that, or are you just participating in word salad? That's an entirely different subject. But in the case of do you go ask, I ended up being able to go ask a lot of really bright people about sport because I don't, if you have a Olympic gold medal, you can walk into a lot of places and say, "Hey, I'd like to know about that." And people are like, "Cool, I'd like to tell you about that." And you go, "Great, cool." Like you put the medal away because you don't really want to talk about it because you were just like, "I just literally like to learn about that." And so along the way, I came across a character, David Weck. He invented the Bosu ball, which you've seen. Everyone's seen at every gym. The half Swiss ball. So of course, this very eccentric guy in the '90s cuts his Swiss ball in half and then staples it to a piece of plywood and then glues it all together and then wraps it in duct tape. And he comes up with this methodology, balanced locomotion. And the peer reviews say, no, no, the other thing's right, Pavlov press. It's all science with peer reviews about the Pavlov press. And then this guy comes along and says, I don't think so. I think it's a spinal engine. And he gets very much, you know how these things go, it gets bifurcated and da-da. Anyway, I came across him a few years ago, and what he had to say really intuitively clicked with me. And then I started looking around, and I realized, oh, there's a whole bunch of us ex-athletes who are having the same experience. We were taught all these things to move in a certain way, in a very up and down the Pavlov press. And then this came along, and it said, hey, it's all about getting into your coil and exploding out of it. Who cares who's right? I use it. It's very effective. I'm 49. I'm going to play in 3 different leagues this coming September. So it's working. I don't know how to say it any other way. It's working. So I'm able to unwind injuries. I'm able to prepare for soccer and play the games without missing them for injury because I went and looked into this very basic thing that his whole premise is around a rope. You just do this rope flow. There's no routine to it. It's all about just moving through. It looks like Tai Chi with a rope. I think that's the term you coined. And so I do a lot of that. Yes, my other compatriots are doing the very typical warm up. They're great soccer players. They're maybe not as limber as I am right now because I'm doing the rope flow. And yeah, it definitely I think what maybe you're getting at too, though, is sometimes it takes a bit of courage. I sometimes have to stand there and go, man, it'd be so easy to go over there and just be with the boys and do it. But I'm also one of the old. I think I'm the oldest guy on the team, and I can play the most games because I have the discipline to not be so concerned about not standing out, but going and honoring the way in which I know how to get prepared. And so if we've showed up at a cold field in the middle of February and we just run out of the locker room and sprint across the field, three of the guys are limping by halfway and two more are limping at the other end. And by the end of the game, most of them are hobbled, Really great soccer players. They can both use both feet. I can only use my right, but I'm still jogging at the end because I do this routine that gets me ready both mentally and physically through breath work. I synchronize my breath and my movement, and I really fine tune my proprioception. These are all terms that in optometry you're very familiar with. And so I would lend to that group, hey, there's a way in which, maybe we should get there 10 minutes earlier and we'll go through this routine. And they say, yeah, no skipping rope for me, guy. I'm going to do the thing I've always done. Stay with me.
I love that story. I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about that since we chatted.
Funny.
I've been thinking about that because you're right. I mean, to your point, it takes courage to do something different, right? To believe in it and test it yourself and feel confident in that. And that's happening in the world of healthcare too. There's vision therapy. It's helping your brain process the world in how you see it to improve learning, to improve for concussion recovery, all these areas that were kind of deemed pseudoscience and now are mainstream. But when they started, people were poo-pooed it. It was like, hey, that's not real medicine. That's not real optometry. And now there's red light therapies and other things that are coming into mainstream, if you want to call it medical eye care. And I think that that's how everything starts with someone that's courageous enough to try it and prove it out and be effective. So kudos to you. And I know you get a lot of latitude because you're a champion athlete. If I do something strange and peculiar and unique, I get a lot of funny stares. But I just enjoy watching you warm up. Is just a phenomenal. In fact, if we were playing you in soccer, I would be intimidated with the work that you have going on there.
I
It's
wish the whole
amazing.
team would do it. I can't get anyone to do it, but yeah, I'm that guy. I wander around the field too. I get like as soon as I'm not in the play, I'm wandering around, finding all the different like corners of my coil so I can come back out. But yeah, I don't know. We all have our thing, and sometimes it takes a little bit of you know I just don't care. It's not that I don't care, it's just that I don't care attitude to how other people might perceive you. And I think my dad would call that be true to thyself. There you go.
Well, and you know what, like I think it's cool because you've tested a lot of things, right? In triathlon training, you test it and see if it works, and I think that is what all professions need. I know some of my colleagues have taken away their front desk, for instance. They've reimagined how
Hmm.
it would be to enter one of our clinics. Somebody greets you right away. It's not like the formal, like, paternalistic viewpoint where you're coming in to, somebody that's in a hierarchical situation. You're more greeted as a welcome member of the public coming in to a place where we expect you and know you and understand your eyes and
Hmm.
understand your needs. And I think that healthcare in the future is going to incorporate those pieces that we're trying to trend that way. So I think, like you say, being courageous to do things a little bit different, whether it's in sports and warm up and soccer and triathlons, or it's in your profession like optometry, I think is going to be needed. We have to evolve.
Yeah, and there's the piece too, and then I think that we all have a bit of oppositional disorder, where we don't want to be told what to do. So the fine art of like being true to thyself and doing the things you do without telling other people what to do as you immediately run into this, binary, you told me therefore I can't. And then, and we see that obviously with parenting where, this journey of parenting where we don't really know what we're doing and that's okay too. And then, how do I, you know, impart and show that I'm an advocate and I have agency and therefore you do too. How do I do that without telling them what to do? And it's really hard, especially in a situation where you care so deeply. And you could extrapolate that to say a clinic where it's your bread and butter, it's your livelihood. You care so deeply. So sometimes I'm sure what happens in a business like that is you have a succession where you're like, oh, wait a minute, how do I hand this off to someone without telling them what to do? How do I build mutual gain and trust so that I'm able to transition beyond this or to be part of this, but not all of this? That's been very challenging.
It's so interesting. I mean, I know you have two lovely daughters who I've met and had the pleasure of being around on vacation with, and I think for me with my three kids, that no unsolicited advice piece where you really are dying to tell them how to do it and really, direct or control those outcomes. I think somewhat it's the fear of failure, right? As well, it's like, hey, you don't want them to stumble, so therefore they should, be prescribed the route they should take, as opposed to having that experimentation of losing their, metaphorical footing in what they're
Hmm.
doing as they go forward to learning, because that learning piece is just so important to understanding when to stop and pivot and go in a different direction. So if we're kind of
Hmm.
controlling it as parents, it's a bit challenging. That's also for our staff, Simon. For me at the office, it's like, hey, people are going to fail. I call it the first attempt in learning. Fail. It's okay to make a misstep. What is not okay is to just try to brush it under the carpet and not recognize it, acknowledge it, and realize that's part of the learning process. And we're all going to help you learn to be better as we go forward. So I wondered, tying it back to life and sports for you, did you have a lot of coaches help you figure things out in triathlon, or did you kind of experiment more?
You know what you're just saying before reminds me of, did you hear about, what the CrowdStrike trophy is now? Okay, so CrowdStrike put out the big update and then it crashed all the flights, massive, massive disruption to the global economy. And it was an error. And 6 weeks later, at the Coders Awards, like it'd be the Rotten Tomatoes equivalent of the Coders Award, they gave the CTO of CrowdStrike this massive, mangled, deformed trophy. And he got up and they said in the thing, we were surprised you showed up. None of you guys ever show up. Like, this is the Independent Hackers Association. We're just making fun of you. What are you doing here? And the guy said, I'm here to get my trophy because we earned it. And I'm taking this back to the office and I'm going to put it in the office and say, hey, we bleep up too, like that's just part of it. Fail, fail, fail. What happens next? Next thing's next. So I loved it. It was a great thing. He just took it. He goes, I'm not proud of this, but I'm taking it. I'm owning it. I'm take this back to the office. And I heard they were later. They're like, no, don't take the trophy. Like, that's ours. But so anyway, yeah. To your question, I mean, around coaches, I met a lot of coaches along the way, and the great ones were the ones that said less. Say more to say less to say more. I was around a few profoundly intelligent individuals who understood people first, and they understood performance as part of that equation. They had a passion for performance, but they had a passion for people first. They understood and were obsessive about um, putting all the best of oneself with our best foot forward, but it was all within the context of, this is a community of people. We're in this village together, and it started and finished there. And I'll say I had a couple coaches who didn't understand that, and I hope I'm on their journey now. Years later, they continued to move in that direction in the same manner I'm working towards. But that, they may have had all the technical ability in the world, but they really they didn't really see it as a village. It was more of a, independent silos working towards a zero sum game. And I don't think it was malicious in any way or nefarious. I think it was just a phase of their they're work in progress, just in the same manner as myself. So yeah, they're great coaches along the way, and great experiences and friendships, and hardships too. A lot of you know, a lot of moments of like losing a lot of sleep over it. So
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. When you come through that as a group, yeah, it's amazing. A couple of my thoughts here are, coaching. In fact, in optometry, we have a business coach. I'm part of I Recommend. It's a group of optometrists nationwide, basically, that group their marketing and training together. And we have a business coach that helps us work on the business piece and set our budgets and things like that, which is not what we were trained for in optometry school. We didn't have that knowledge, so it's kind of good to learn from somebody that understands from the business world. We're running a business and how to run that. I think that's really great. I also recently, I just finished actually with my own executive coaching sessions, which was really fascinating because when I started, I filled out the intake form, Simon, and I said, "Hey, I'm the coach of my team. I really don't need a coach, do I?" And then I realized, we all could use a coach, and different coaches over our lifetime, because we're going to take little pieces from each one and then turn the mirror on ourselves and reflect on how we want to be better and improve. And I think that is good and fine, instead of having that veneer of what, I'm the best, and that continuous improvement mindset. One of my previous guests, Ravi Tana, he said he goes by that philosophy, kaizen, again, a Japanese term of continuous improvement, and no equivalent term in English, but that continuous improvement. And in order to you know try to, or strive for continuous improvement, you need to be self-reflective and need to have some kind of person, mentor, coach, whatever you want to call it, that will drive that self-reflection so you can contemplate improvement. Is that fair?
hmm yeah, that's I mean, they can see the forest for the trees, can't they? And then if you bring like vulnerability and you trust, and you can establish mutual gain, they understand the role they're playing and what's in it for them, and they're honest about that too. That's often, as soon as they're like, you're in this position where the person is like, I don't know, as soon as there's a power imbalance, there's difficulty in that relationship. There's an inevitable failure in that relationship. So when you can come to these relationships, there's mutual respect and you understand the mutual gain, whatever that trade is. And then those people can see the forest for the trees. And how many times? I mean, that's your primary relationship, the person you spend the most time eye to eye with. Somewhere in there, if you're able to spend a lot of time eye to eye, it's because you trust each other. And if you trust each other, it's because you've also seen the forest for the trees for one another, to say, hey, darling. Like, that's the tripping hazard. And they say, hey, darling, that's one too. And you kind of go, back and forth like, oh, thank you for pointing that out. So, yeah, again, it always comes back, doesn't it? The people, the people, the people,
Yeah.
human
Well,
relations.
and I think that is the key piece. It's my dad used to say, uh, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
hmm
Because if you're not ready in your mindset, and I think that's part of, for me, trying to create this culture of continuous learning in our optometric offices, where we're not calling you out. I know some of my colleagues, they suggested, when they've told a team member how they could do their job better, they go immediately on stress leave. And that's a real trend line, is feeling so anxious, or you know so much trepidation on improving, that you just feel overwhelmed, as opposed to embracing the concept of that continuous improvement. So I think it's a mindset, and I think that you definitely have it. I mean, I could tell right away you have it. Even that game, I know you like little games. What was that game you were showing me at the airport? You're playing this complex game, and
yeah.
to use your brain. And I'll just frame this up, and then you can tell me a little bit about this game. But I like that you were always trying to beat your score, and you play it with your daughter, and you're trying to beat you and is it Pippa, that we're doing it together, trying to figure it out. So tell me about that.
I mean, it's called Tre Fute. Pretty clever. The dice game. there's a fun element in it because at first when you get it, you think you're trying to score high scores. But actually, as you play it, you realize you're just looking for patterns and you're training your brain on patterns. It doesn't really matter. You're actually, what's most fun is at the end, predicting what the score is going to be. And see how accurate you can be because you've recognized the patterns that were involved in that. So, yeah, I find it. I mean, we all find it's a vice, it's tactile because you get to roll something and write something down. It allows you to use your brain in a different way. And then as the title of the game is, it's clever. There's a real admiration as you see this come together. This puzzle that appears at first so complicated, but as soon as you kind of get the rhythm of it, much like anything, it becomes beautifully simple. So you're like, oh, yeah, right. That's just how that works. And so it's been a great way to connect. I mean, we live in this age of screens, so we're always trying to find ways in which to disengage ourselves from these screens that are what they are, and then and engage in things that are across from one another in a real environment where you're moving amongst and picking up something across and you're interacting together. And you know I think that stuff's important, especially in this age of this dimension of like, right now you're just a bunch of bits and bytes that are one frame off, and I can't hear you. I can't hear you in the same way. I certainly can't. I don't know if I want to smell you, Trav, but I can't smell you. So I don't know where you are.
We're
Yeah.
virtual, and thankfully for some
Yeah.
of our listeners, they don't even get the video portion. They're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So that's perfect. I wondered, you know, how do you define success? Early in your career, was it always the achievement? Was it winning the race that you wanted to define success with, or was it, as you said, the process of training and finding satisfaction there, or and when you later now, post athletic career, post, let's call it professional career, triathlete at the top of the world. What have you changed in that way of defining success?
I think the only success barometer is how soundly you sleep, right? Like everything we do comes back to sleeping soundly. The people
Oh,
that
I love
we're
it.
around, the way in which we navigate our day, if you really think about it, it's all an attempt to get back to sleep soundly. I've, I've checked the perimeter. I have the fuel I need. I have potable water. I've got people that I care about and I find meaning from the responsibilities that one another bear for each other. I can go to sleep now, right? So the only measure of success in my mind is whether or not you can sleep soundly. If you can't sleep soundly, then work backwards from there as to what is it that is keeping you awake. And then instead of saying I'm the type of person who can't sleep, which suggests that you're set in stone, you think I've become the type of person who's struggling to sleep, who isn't sleeping soundly. And then we work backwards to say where, and you'll usually find it comes from your relationships with other people. It always comes from your relationship with other people. And then in order to, reconcile that, you have to go do the hardest work there is, which is connect and communicate and find, peace and vulnerability through vulnerability with other people. So yeah, that's the only measure of success. The rest are just neat details that we made up. We created, in my case, we created this fun thing called sport, and we ran around in our Speedo. It was just an excuse not to go to war with one another. It was like, I don't know, stop fighting. Go chuck that thing over there, and you chuck it, and then we'll say, oh, good job, like further. All of which the success marker, back to your question, is like, how did you sleep soundly?
I love that. That's super profound. When you had had a significant injury in 2012 during the London Olympics, and you retired shortly after. How did you first, navigate that transition, from the world class triathlete to, you know, I want to say a regular member of society. I know you're special in so many ways in those other aspects, but how did you kind of go from that fame and notoriety of being that Olympic champion to kind of civilian life? Was there a transition period? I kin it to some degree, an older optometrist passing the torch to the next generation or giving up a practice that they started. I know, personally, I'm going to have to go through that at some point. So I just wondered what your thoughts on that are.
Tumultuous comes to mind. Unsettled, um, discombobulated would also come to mind. Yeah, I don't know, like it's not unique to, there is no really such thing as going back to regular life or civilian. You're just some guy who ran, in my case, it was just some guy who ran around a Speedo one day, and then the next, a little while later, I was no longer running around in my Speedo, but life carried on. It feels like a big transition. You have a lot of identity tied up in all that, but you pretty quickly get stripped of all that. And it's not a unique to sport. It's not unique to anybody. It's a shared experience we all go through at some point in our life. You might go through it early on. Say you're a child actor. You might go through it pretty early on. Or let's say you were someone who, you waited till your late 60s to do it. What I mean by go through it is have like it all stripped back, and you kind of go to this, like, I don't know, the forest fire burns, might be the right analogy. And then all the cliche isms that come of that, as in the forest fire burns, and then those red fire lilies come out because the only way they can bloom is because the fire was hot enough to crack the shell, and the metaphor carries on and on and on, and I really look at it as a gift now. At the time, it was, and it is still a work in progress. Let's be clear, but that specific, let's call it that 12 months around, what am I doing next? Was one, was really difficult, and also was such a gift because it like gave me the opportunity to really have to look at things and go, where am I at in life? What am I doing? How am I treating people around me? And then having to reconcile those things is a continuous journey, but one I wouldn't trade for the world.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I always relate it back to optometry and sort of the evolution of starting this practice. You're the only one. You got one staff, and now we've got 5 clinics. We've got a huge team, and you need to let go of ego, along the way, and empower the team to be growing and learning and doing those things and taking those positions and winning accolades, and it doesn't have to be always about me, in my practice. And I think that is an important learning along the way. And again, it's back to, can an optometrist that's evolving in their positioning to become more of a mentor advisor and less of the front and center of the practice, can they still take that satisfaction and still be an important part of the team as they transition away from full-time patient care and that type of thing. So it really fascinates me, that whole psychology that you go through the tumult and you go through that discombobulation, and then you settle on a space of new growth and new adventures and joy that you take about that next generation, bring it forward. And I know you've done some coaching that way, so you must have found some satisfaction and joy that way.
Yeah, that's its own journey for sure, because you take on this responsibility, you have weight to words, and the actions you take. And so then you've got to navigate this world where there's someone saying to you, oh, you're my mentor, so therefore tell me what to do. And you're kind of going, scratching your head, going like, I don't know what I'm doing either. So what happens next? So yeah, that's its own journey. I have my own series of, let's call them elders. It's the only way to put it, really. I'm surrounded by a group of elders that help guide me along the way, in each of their own way. Maybe their own secret squirrel. They got this little nugget of information around how to do this. Sometimes they're leading by example and they don't mean to. You know, sometimes sometimes you're observing, going like, oh, that's what happens if I don't like take care of my self-compassion. If I don't have self-compassion, then I kind of wander into the trance of unworthiness, and I'm stuck there. So, we've all been around those people, and they have deep wounds that come from whatever's happened along the way. And, in those cases, you're more of just trying to be a safe space in which they can kind of like take a moment of reprieve from this like battle that they're facing, much the same as the one we all kind of navigate in our own way, whether it's through not having self-compassion or whatever struggles in the relationships we have in life. But that's that word, it always comes back to, isn't it? It's like, how do you show compassion to yourself so that, because it's otherwise it's a long, well, either way, it's a long, hard fight, but,
Yeah.
like,
And we need to do that along the way. Whatever we have to forgive ourselves and love ourselves and do all those things. 100%. I wanted to pivot here, Simon, to talk about what are you most excited about the future of sports and health? I know you're involved in various supplement pieces, and kind of explain that a little bit. What do you think's great about the future health wise?
that's a really interesting question. I mean, I would imagine that the most exciting thing is the amount of energy, both kilowatts and kilohertz, in terms of mindscape or people paying attention to the energy that is going into this space and the shift that's happened in the language we use around it. More around healing, being healing centered, and that really resonated with me. And in fact, when you start to come into situations, say, I recently been able to observe a situation that I was a sporting situation that I was very entrenched in many years ago. I haven't been. Now I can see the forest for the trees a little bit, but my approach now is to think, oh, well, how do you take a healing centered approach? As in, what are the wounds that are here that are continuing to have this dysfunction happen? Instead of trying to remove someone or exile them from it, how do we heal the wounds for all those people so that they can go forth and prosper and find greater, deeper fulfillment out of the thing that they're doing, and then through that, further impact. In all that rambling, I lost track of what your original question was. But
I was just thinking, like, the future of sports. I'll give you to start.
yeah,
I'll give you
sorry, I
a
went
little
off on a
story.
tangent there.
I know I love the chat. This is why we're having a chat. My friend, his son played basketball, and was quite a good basketball player. Didn't quite make the UVic university team, and then started playing online basketball, and now is a professional, you know, NBA
Esports.
2K esports
Wow, cool.
basketball player in
Yeah,
quotes
yeah.
for the Golden State Warriors. Got a nutritionist, got a a therapist, got all the gear, and plays sports paid online. So what are your thoughts about that? And people watch it. Watching an avatar or AI. How's technology changing the future of sports? I know that goes against everything you're talking about, sending,
Well,
into the woods and running and feeling the outside. What are your thoughts?
I don't know if it does though. I don't know if it does because, well, I spend an exorbitant amount of time on screen, so there's no difference between me, you know, patching code and them and building applications and them like playing two or 2K sports or whatever it is. So, in fact, I kind of envious that I'd like to play some 2K sports too, and I'm sure they'd like to do a bit more of the other things. So as long as they have in balance, and I'm sure if they're performing at such a high level, someone is saying to them like, "Hey, if you spend your entire day in here, you will degrade your performance very quickly. You better get outside too." Much in the same way that we all have other responsibilities. So I'm no, there's a piece of esports I have tremendous admiration for. I think the hard part there is though as much as people love the purity of the game, and maybe they love the purity even in the esports version, that's not my favorite moments though. And the favorite moments, the things that really speak to us, are the human condition moments. So when the German shot putter sings gospel in the press conference, that's not happening in esports. The person behind the joystick is not in any way being featured in it. They're simply just playing the game. Great job, terrific. They can compute very quickly the actions that need to be taken, but how much of that are we going to watch when we don't get to see later the German shot putter sing gospel in the press conference, which was probably the highlight of the Olympics for me. It was like this woman wins the shot put. They say, "How did you do it?" She said, "I don't know. I sat down between my bad throw and that one that won it for me, and I started singing gospel. I sang this song," and then she just sang for like a minute and a half. And it was like, I was like, that's the best thing I've ever seen. Like, this is amazing. So you're not going to have those elements. Maybe I'm missing something, but again, it's those human moments. I don't remember. I'm not even sure if saw her throw the shot put. I just saw the press conference later where she was singing gospel. So
Yeah.
we'll see what the future of sport holds. I am excited. It's interesting to see the technology piece. It's also cool. I mean, at the end of the day, this stuff all has a switch. It's called electricity. You turn it off and it doesn't exist. So, and then you're kind of like, huh, what now? I guess I'll go pick up that backpack and go carry it over there, you know? So, um, that's also such a big element of sport is just the like, I like the ridiculous nature of it. We made up a bunch of rules, you know. We're like, hey, I don't know, there's that like rectangle over there. Stop the little ball from going in there, and then take it down the other end and put it in the other rectangle. And then we made it all important. We made up jerseys, we made up songs, we made up meaning, we made up trophies. All great stories, but at the end of the day, you know, I don't know, it's absurd. You know, I like that part. It's patently absurd.
That's it's so interesting, and the technology VO2 max and things like that. Like, were you involved in that with like high level testing and all of that, right?
You know, that's an interesting story. I didn't understand. I have a story, and I'm going to say with an asterisk because it's a long time ago, and this story has evolved over time. Here's how I remember it now, so let's call it that. I was taken to the Casio, you know, Casio watches. They sponsored the Talent ID program at the Australian Institute of Sport. So I was there as a 16-year-old. I moved to Australia when I was 16 and went to boarding school. When I was 17, I got carted off to the Australian. I had an Aussie passport, so I had an opportunity to race for Australia. I was carted off to the Australian Institute of Sport, and I was told to jump on a treadmill and do a VO2 max test, and they were going to post all the results later. And I just jogged along on the treadmill. And as soon as it was hard at all, I stepped off. And they said, no, no, come on, like get going. And I said, no, I'm good. And they said, oh, you know, you're supposed to do that. We have to dial an ID. And I said, no, I'm good. And they said, and at the time there was this real reaction like, oh, that kid, like he doesn't have it. He quit early. My theory was, why in the world would I want to give away why would I even want to know what my governor is?
Mm.
Ignorance is bliss. If ever there's ignorance is bliss, why don't I just assume I have the biggest one out there? And why don't I just assume it's, you know, whatever those scores are? Why would I want to be running along in a race and know that that guy's at 88 and I'm at 82?
Mm.
Or that guy's at 74 and I don't have to work as hard because I'm at 82, whatever it is. So
Mm.
I could guess, we can all extrapolate as to what maybe it would have been, but I took real strength in the fact that I was able to step outside of the conformity necessary to post the score. The Canadian kid won't do it. And I was like, yeah, no, you're right, I won't. But I just went up to the thing. I was like, okay, he's talented. Great, great, great. Thanks for all the information. See you later. They said, oh, he's not talented. And 6 years later, we were listening to the Canadian anthem. So, you
That's
know,
super fascinating. What a great story. I mean, I do think sometimes we're our own limiting factor, our mind, right? Instead of this unlimited perspective where we're limitless. You took that really to heart in triathlon training. You just broke through any kind of perceived glass ceiling. So that is really really fascinating. Have you taken any of your learnings from training as an athlete to the business world? I know. Tell us a little bit about Relentless Pursuit Partners and some of that. I like how you like even that Relentless Pursuit Partners has a kind of a triathlon training, vibe to me. So how did that come about? What do you do there, and what are some of the learnings you've applied to business?
I mean, you're seeing me hesitate because you go into it, you get told a lot like, oh, you're going to be so good at business because you were really good at sport. That is not true. And it's going to be smooth sailing from here. You're just going to go forth and everything, you know, the world is your oyster. That's not true. And so, yeah, I've gone through a whole series of much as I did as an athlete. I was 16th at junior nationals. I was told I was not talented enough to be on the Aussie team. I was told I was not talented enough to be on the Canadian Ontario junior team. That's why I moved to Australia. So I failed a lot. You know, you gotta be careful of all the cliches, but it's true. I also learned how to fail a lot. So I learned how to puzzle, you know, probability solve for all these different um, variables that became the toolkit that I had in order to navigate the inevitables. I also grew up with a few athletes and saw a lot of athletes along the way who didn't learn how to fail early. They were hyper successful as young athletes. The people around them were successful in due course too. The coach that was with them, the parents that were by their side, and then they inevitably ran into competition, higher levels of competition and hurdles. And they hadn't failed, so they had no tools. And the people around them had no tools, so they just pointed at other people. And the system just went and perpetuated this. So it was a real gift to come 16th at junior nationals. How do I apply that all to business? I mean, the same things apply, don't they? You know, there's been some shoveling of shit. There's been some real like, oh man, that was good money after bad. Done that a couple times, but in the last little bit, I think settled. I will say that I don't know if it's experience. You're gonna think, oh, you have experiences, you've learned from them. I also got back to doing some really basic things first thing in the morning that set up a better day. So, you know, it turns out if you go get a glass of water, you do some forward articulated motion, you do some breathing exercises, you don't just wander straight onto your phone and explode your attention span with information, that you also you begin your day in a centered and like calm, content, clear as kind manner, and you're able to be more productive. And I think it just took a long time to get back to that. That's how I was as an athlete. I got away from that because I was like, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. Turned out I needed to do even more than I did. And that's the journey, you know. Our shadow self kind of comes along and likes to trip us up and be like, no, no, I think you should just go on your phone and drink 6 cups of coffee and then, you know, lay on your back all day. But it turns out if you do the self-regulation routine that is pretty basic stuff, you watch the sun rise, you go out and get some exercise, you move in various ways to orientate yourself in the world, and if you walk the perimeter of your property, and you'll settle your amygdala because you think you've checked the perimeter, you know. So there's some pretty basic things that I started to do that I think, as much as the experience of past learnings I've been accumulating those learnings. I've also rectified through self-regulation. And you know where that really comes from is the people in my life. You know, my partner Sarah is just, we've been very good for one another's nervous systems. And in that we've found peace, and then within that we've found prosperity to whatever extent we're experiencing.
No, and I think, in sport and business and whatever, frankly, that you're doing, having that centered approach where you're comfortable, you sleep well at night, you try your best, it's not a sprint, but it's a journey, and sometimes you're going to come up with to barriers, and you're going to be able to go around them or above them or under them, whatever it takes. That's just going to be part of the journey. So you're just not going through these highs and lows all the time. I think you've equipped yourself with those skills through learning and experiencing, and that is great. And I think you, like you say, your elders, and for us in optometry, that's our colleagues, really sharing these challenges, sometimes in real time. How have you experienced that staffing issue? What kind of new technology have you brought in? That type of sharing environment, I think, is really important. And that's trust in the people around you, being able to, be vulnerable to say, hey, I'm confused and I don't know the way here. Can you give me some guidance? I think those are all traits of world class, because your ego's tucked away and you're willing to learn. You've failed before. You're willing to fail. You're willing to try. I think that is really cool from my point of view. So, when is there any advice you'd have for some optometrist that's transitioning to a later phase? We won't name names, but that is going to a different type of. It's funny because I said to my coach, maybe I want to be Yoda, and she goes, "Do you want to be Yoda?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to be Yoda." And she says, "Yoda is the person that everybody comes to ask what they should do, as opposed to, you know, having them have the tools to know what to do. So, I mean, I guess Yoda also helped them become Jedi and learn the tools. So it was a bit mixed. I was a bit confused. I didn't want to debate on Jedi, training, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
for me, what advice would you have for those kind of, you're transitioning, but you're still energetic. You still want to be part of that equation, and you don't want to just. I don't think it's good for the whole profession to just wash your hands of it. So what's the best advice you can bring me? I mean, the person I'm talking about.
I don't have any advice. Um, I will say what has served me is what I like to call, for lack of a better term, the the do nothing defense. Often our fear response is our first response, right? Like we're built into us. We survived this long because of it. And so our fear mechanism will kick in right away and go, okay, these are the things that I need to be afraid of. And having the discipline to have propriety of breath, to let that moment pass and then consider, not react. There it is. So the do nothing defense, you see it so often. If you pay attention, particularly in sport, you'll notice. And I mean, the greatest cliche ever is the Western. They both step out into the street. The music chimes. They stand in front of each other for the shootout, the duel. The one guy flinches and the other guy shoots him. Like he didn't do anything. The one guy flinched. He did something. The other guy shot him. It's a bad analogy, but it's a violent analogy. But I think you get the point. Is like having the discipline, be a disciple unto yourself, to take a breath, let the moment pass. Maybe take another breath. The do nothing defense. What is the compelling thing to do here? Obviously there's paralysis through analysis. That's its whole thing. But am I able to let the fear register, let my anxiety do its thing, make the calculations, and then find a moment to not do anything and then proceed? More information. It's all just information. So maybe that sounded like advice, but it really is. It was akin to the do nothing defense. Deploy the do nothing defense.
You know what I take from that, Simon, for me is, everybody's feeling your energy, right? And if your
Mm.
energy, it comes off as an anxiety, catastrophizing the future, whatever that feeling is, it's not going to bring success. What's going to bring success is sleeping well at night. I love that. That's great advice, and it's a great litmus test to how you're doing in your everyday piece. Are you sleeping well at night? So, wanted to pivot to a little segment we have, this or that. I call it better one or better two, because this
Okay,
is
I like that. Yeah,
Optometry
yeah,
Unleashed.
good. My kids,
Uh,
my
be,
kids
be,
like that game.
yeah, and just so it's better one or better two are almost the same. That's really what
Okay, yeah,
optometrists are
sweet,
looking
sweet.
for. So, but anyway, it might be better one or better two, better three. So, swimming, biking, or running, better one, two, or three.
Oh, swimming every time. Every time.
Swimming.
Swimming's the
You
greatest
love
thing you can
swimming.
do. Oh,
You're
you
you're
got
like
it.
a
I mean, I
fish.
love the other things too, but I'm like, get me in the ocean. Yeah.
Hey, swimming. I love it. Okay,
Get me
the
back to the
Canadian.
ocean.
Yeah, back to the ocean, and it's love. We're on Vancouver Island. Simon's in Victoria, if everybody doesn't know that, but he's by the ocean, which is fantastic. Canadian Rockies or the Australian Outback?
I mean, I'm a Canuck through and through. So as much as it was neat to have a Australian connection and an Aussie dad, and as spectacular and vast and as imposing as the Aussie outback might be, yeah, you head to the mountains, head to the Rockies. Go for the
Yeah,
go for the
perfect. I love
view.
it. Better cheat day or better rest day?
Um, Both. Gotta love a little of both.
Both. You
A
can say it.
little
You
bit
can
of
say
both.
both.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
gotta have
both. I'm
both.
going
You gotta have.
both there. You gotta have a rest day where you're recharging, and you gotta have a cheat day where you're doing everything but recharging.
And what was your cheat? What did you eat on your cheat day?
What did I eat on the cheat day? I mean, Sarah and I are into smashed. We're making our own smashed burgers now, so that's our big thing. So I'm gonna go for that as an everyday, but also a cheat day. Smash burger tacos, whatever we called them last night. So yeah,
Oh, amazing, amazing. As a side note, I made these barbecue chip burgers where I crushed up barbecue chips, Lay's barbecue chips, and put them in a burger and fed them to
yeah.
my friends at after golf. But anyway, good. That's a little tip. Should try it. Um, Training or board meetings? Which would you prefer?
Okay, paddle board meetings. I've gone for the middle ground.
Oh, I love it. Hey, that was,
Play on words. Yeah,
you know
but
what? We're going to have a paddleboard meeting, Simon. We're going to do it.
sweet.
Uh,
Can't wait.
Card games or brain teasers?
Board games. I'm not. That was not a play on the last one, but like I'm
You
for
like board
all
games?
board game.
Yeah.
Yeah, board games. Count me in
Yeah.
all the time. And I like collaborative. I'm all into collaborative board games now.
Oh,
I
amazing.
don't need to see a 40-year-old dad beat a 7-year-old son at Settlers of Catan. That's not fun, but like, not that that happened, Jordan. But I like board games that are collaborative. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay, winning an Olympic gold medal or a world championship title?
I mean, no comment.
Both. You can say both too.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, sure, or
and
just yeah, no comment.
like this is another interesting one. Winning by a narrow margin or absolutely obliterating, dominating the competition?
I really love the theater of sport, so I would even go far as to say whatever the greatest theater is. I love the theater sport. When I came second in Beijing across the finish line, my dad's hanging from the grandstand. I said, "Gosh, I just about did it again." And my dad says, "Oh, you just learned the poetry of sport." And what are you talking about, Dad? And he says, "Well, 8 years ago, you beat a German who inspired a young German who got you back." So there's the poetry of sport. So maybe that's the answer to that question right there. I'll take poetry over anything.
I love it. No, that's a great answer. Okay, so just before we wrap up, do you have any final questions for me? Did you want anything on your mind? You want to ask me anything?
Well, yeah. How do I get in on that golf and that smash burger with the potato chips?
Yeah, next time I'm inviting you. Come up, stay with us. I'm gonna cook you my version of the smash burger, and we'll compare. But yeah, you got an open invitation, Simon. Absolutely. What about what should we look for in the future of Simon Whitfield? Is there anything that's getting you excited about? I know we haven't talked about AI, and we were chatting a little bit about AI avatars and stuff. So I wanted to get your thoughts on AI and what are you working? You're always working on something very very fascinating.
I'm just excited by computer science. I like problem solving. Um, AI is like a term within computer science, So in information technology, there's like a term AI. It means different things to different people. Technologically, purists have their own opinion of that. Marketing people have their own other opinion of that, and somewhere the truth is somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I'm just really fascinated by computer science and information technology. I work with a group out of the UK, Perform OS, and we build information technology. We work in the information technology field. I know the glossary of terms. I grew up with it around the table. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I know how to talk to the people who do. So I speak a bit of that language. I speak athlete, and so I can translate. That's the role I play. Someone says, I would like this application. And I say, let me go ask the engineer that we can build that. And I wander into the spatial and I say, hey, can you build this? Can you build that? And they say, I can build that, but we'd have trouble building that unless we did this. And I say, okay, cool. Who do I need to talk to about that? And they say, go talk to that person. I go, great, let's go talk to that person. So that's the role I play now. I do it within the realm of sport, but I also do it in the realm of other things that I find interesting. I think we built a really interesting solution to how it is people inquire and interact with the world. We've built a conversational IQ that we think is really interesting and we like to play with. And if other people found the same thing, they would go to our Perform OS site and they would say that looks cool, or they might go there and say this looks like math, silly math, and I don't want anything to do with it, and that's great too. There you go. That's what I do.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, you were telling me how we could make a little mini Trevor Miranda avatar, feed it, large language models, and it could answer, you know, questions like I was answering it. It's pretty fascinating and pretty scary at the same time.
Yeah, I think was really interesting, which is here now that technology exists, is when someone could go listen to this interview and then pause it and ask a question like, "Hey, Trevor, or Simon, I'd like you to follow up on this." And you'd have these conversations that wouldn't be just, they would have the core spine of the conversation that was the original. But then you'd have all the branches that came off of it. How many times have you listened to a podcast or watched a piece of content where you're like, well, wait a minute, like, I don't understand that part of what you're saying. Most political interviews that you ever hear, you want to say, hold on, I have a question. That's gibberish. So I'm going to ask more about that before you just move on to the next thing. I'm being quick, you get the point. People you find interesting. I would love to delve in further. You know, you and I, we have here, what, 75 minutes. We've got to keep it somewhat on to track. You know, there's a time to wrap up. We build technology that allows you to go back into that conversation and then ask a question. And if it, and the large language model that's being trained by yourself or Optometry Unleashed would be able to go through and say, oh, the answer to that is this. Does that sound right? The answer to that is this. Here's some reasoning behind that. Here's the citations that support that. And, or here's a question for a human that's going to answer that because I don't know the answer. I'm just mathy math, you know? So that, like, I really enjoy that part of it. And it comes from I don't know, just a genuine interest in how these things work. I grew up with it around the table. I've met great people along the way, and I'm really passionate about what we do now. With the asterisks that also go outside. You know, like, all this stuff is cool and it's all information, you know, shiny screens, LEDs.
I love that you say go get outside. One of our previous podcast guests was talking about myopia management and going um, going outside actually reduces the amount of myopia you can get over time. So you're right on track. Is going outside is good for your health, but it's definitely good for your eyes, which is part of your health. So I want to thank you, Simon Whitfield, for joining us on Optometry Unleashed. It's just been a pleasure to chat with you. I feel like the time goes fast, and I'm really looking forward to getting together in person and doing some paddleboarding or eating a smash burger. But thanks so much for joining us.
I'm looking forward to showing off my left-handed serve to you too. So
Let's do it. What about pickleball?
yeah,
We might have to try the pickleball. Have we tried that?
I'm in for pickleball. I love pickleball. My mom's a big pickleballer, but I'm more into badminton. I really love the sound of things. I'm a misophoniac, so I love the sound of badminton. I like that snap and then go and that whoosh that happens. And it's, you can hear it in tennis. It's not quite as fine tuned, and there's something about the sound of badminton I love, and there's something about the sound of pickleball I don't love.
That's
So
so true. I've played badminton
yeah,
and pickleball. It's absolutely true. So
yeah.
thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Optometry Unleashed. If you have any suggestions for future guests, please reach out to us, like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Optometry Unleashed. I'm Trevor Miranda. Thank you for joining us on Optometry Unleashed. If you like the show or find the content we provide valuable, please hit the follow button on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to support our work at zero cost to you. You can also leave us a review of up to 5 stars on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions for me, comments about the podcast, or guests you would like us to consider, please leave us a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts with your feedback. Our team reviews all the comments we receive on the show to guide us in providing better content for our listeners. And thank you again to Hoya Vision Canada for being a proud sponsor of our podcast.